Welcome back everyone to the 5th episode of my journey into making comics. Today we will be discussing the development phase, which is the phase where we take all the information from the conceptual phase and turn it into actually a story. And not only that, but we're also going to be looking at creating a visual art style for the story and creating a visual library. So it's not only about writing, there will be quite some graphic aspect to it as well. And as usual, I will be showing you some of the books and references that I've used in order to get the job done during this phase myself. Alright, so let's kick it right off and let's start by looking into the first step, which is creating a story outline. Alright, so you've got your ideas all set in motion now. You've noted them down, you've got your mind maps, you're pretty much sure what you want to talk about, you know your characters, and you've got that one-liner that you've written. All this can be seen in the previous episode. Now let's say you've done all that, then you're ready to create your story outline. Now again, there are many ways of doing it, so I'm just gonna share with you my way, the way I've done it, and I do it for like the longer stories and the shorter ones. For the very short stories, or let's say when it's like a few panels and just a simple strip, it's super simple. It's just like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Just as long as the end is the opposite of the beginning, and that's simple as that. For this, yeah, again, there's so many ways of doing it. For when you're writing a very long story, again, there are different things you can do. In my case, for the longer story, I used Blake Snyder's beat sheet. Now I'll show the beat sheet on the screen so that you can follow it. And if you want to do more research on that, you can always follow it also online. Very interesting. I've spoken about the book Save the Cat by Blake Snyder many times, so definitely worth looking into. And so that's one way of doing a story outline. Another way is literally just by simplifying things very much. So basically your beginning and your end have to be each other's opposite. And never forget that your characters have to have a journey. So they have to, by journey I mean that there has to be a transition within them. They go from one state of being to another state of being. That is the most important thing about a story, the transition between point A to point B. And the more characters you add into the mix, obviously the more complicated it gets. But this is super important. Now, how do you create a story outline? When you could do it just simply on a sheet of paper, or you can do it with software. You know, in my case, if it's a complicated story, I will use something like Scrivener, which is a software package specifically for script writing and stuff like that. And if it's something a little bit less complicated, I'll use an outliner program. So I have Omni Outliner, for example, also another by CarbonFin Outliner, which I can then use on my tablet, on my phone, and also at the same time on my desktop computer. So that's it on story outlines. The next step is taking your outline and turning that into individual scenes. Alright, so writing a story is kind of like sculpting a statue. It's very similar. When you sculpt a statue, you always start on the outside, the outer layers, and you start with the big shapes, right? And as you progress making that statue, you start to slowly getting into the smaller details, and until you finally get to the real fine details which give the statue its beauty. Now, the story is identically the same, okay? And that's why you start with an outline, and from that outline, you eventually go to your scenes. And basically all it is from outline to scenes is basically looking at, okay, in the outline you already knew what the beginning of the story was, what the end was, the middle, pretty much all the most important plot points in your story. And when you're going to do your scenes, all you're doing is just taking these individual chunks from your outline and diving into them and dividing them into smaller chunks and turning them into scenes. I think the best way to describe this is to just basically show you the following graph that I've quickly created. So here you can clearly see that there is the story at the top, followed by the events, and the events are these parts of the story that you've come up with during your outline process. And then under that, these events are further divided into individual scenes. Now, what do I mean by scenes? When I say a scene, I mean it has to have a location, a set of actors that are in the location, and obviously they have to play out their part of the story. Once they leave that location, then the scene comes to an end. It's very similar to film production or when I'm storyboarding for films. It's always when the director gives me a scene to storyboard, it's always within a location. And once the actors leave the location, it's a different scene. So that's what I define by scene. So there you go. That's basically it for the part on creating scenes, dividing your outline into scenes. Once you've got that, it's time to write that all-important script. All right, so writing the script. Now, this is not a tutorial on how to write scripts. There are many wonderful books about that have been written by professionals, and they can teach you how to write proficient scripts and good scripts. And again, the scripts are different for every field. So the script that I'm about to show you right here, I've got a script on the screen, is from Reset Access Denied, and it looks very different from the script for Immersion, for example. Even though they're both for comics, it's a bit different because it's a short story versus a long story, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter as long as the information is there. So let me quickly guide you to the screen. We'll have a quick look. And here on the screen, so what you can see now is on this side, the actual script, and on this side, the work that has gone into Reset Access Denied, which can be seen on my website. Right, so as you see, there's just stuff about so the scenes. Okay, so as I described earlier on, the location is a vehicle repair hall, where they basically are repairing these type of mining devices. And here's a bit of a description of what happens in this scene, and then I divide them into pages, and each page I also say, okay, what's in each strip, and then the panel itself. So I go into panel 1, I describe the action, and that's what you're seeing here basically. We are introduced to a large industrial warehouse, blah blah blah, so as you can see here, and then we move on because there's no dialogue. Strip 2, which is a little bit more down, again still no dialogue, so I'll show here. Moving on here, for example, you'll see that again the action is described. Going to strip number 3, which is under it, you've got action, and so the action is being described, and then the character Frankie in this case, which is this guy, he says, "Asher, got a minute." Identically the same information, the same text, just gets copied over. But yeah, so as you can see, it's pretty much standard stuff. It goes up to scene 2. What I can show you is up to, there you go, narrator a few hours later, and that on the website is basically this. You follow up on this, he gets an ID card, he says all good, cool, and then it reaches up to later that night, which is page number 3, strip 1, panel 1. And there you go. That's how I do my scripts. This is how I do them for Reset Access Denied. Immersion is a little bit more complicated. Again, that's a more bigger story, and that's done in Scrivener. I can't really show you much about that because then I will be revealing a lot of the content which is not made available for the public yet. And that's it. That's the piece on script writing. And I guess we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so creating that visual library. That visual library is extremely important. And the reason why is because if you're going to be drawing, or if you're part of a team and your artist has to know what this world that you're creating looks like, it's always good to have reference. That is what your visual library is for. Reference, reference, and more reference. All artists need to have some type of reference before they start drawing. You can't be an expert at everything. You can't know how all cars look just by memory. That's impossible. So you need reference. I need reference all the time. Also for characters. When I'm creating my characters, I often look at, for example, actors that could look like the character, and then I start making a bit of a, like a folder structure with these guys in it. I'm like, okay, Detective Logan looks more or less like this guy or that guy, and I want a mixture of that. And then based on that information, I basically eventually sculpt a character out of it. It's like a studying process, creating this visual library. It's extremely important, and also one of the funnest things to do, because you can create a visual library on the go. You can just do this while you're on the train, or on a bus, or anywhere, while you're on your phone. You can just look around on the internet and get some images and save them. The way I save my work for visual library, I use Pinterest. So you guys are all welcome to have a look at my Pinterest account. I'll provide you with a link. And there I have thousands upon thousands of pins. Obviously I have private boards as well, which are only for me to see, but the grand majority of it is in private. It's all public, anyone can see it. Even my favorite artists are there, so I've got these pins and boards specifically for the art of this artist, the art of that, which are big inspiration for me. I've got boards on comic book references, all these type of things. So I think having a visual library is very, very important, and it can really, really help with communication. If you're not the artist, if you're the, for example, the writer, it is super useful for communicating ideas and just saying, look, this is what I'm thinking about. This is the look. This is the type of vibe, the feeling, the mood that I'm trying to go for. Could you replicate this, or stuff like that? If you're the writer and the artist, it's just useful to have. Having a visual library is super useful, and that's why I strongly recommend that people dive into that and give it a try. So once you got that visual library in place, and you know that there's still going to be more at it, but at least you've got the basics in place, then you can start focusing on creating an art style, because based on your visual library, based on the script, based on all that information that you've got now, it's time to start thinking about, okay, what is this comic actually going to look like? And the next step is an extremely, extremely important one, because your art style dictates the speed, the production quality, which is extremely crucial. So let's have a look at that next step. All right, so establishing an art style. Now this one for me is the biggest one. It is really, really crucial, and it's the one phase or one part of creating comics that I like to really take my time on. If it takes months, so be it. But the reason why this is so important is because once you start a comic and let's say you do a webcomic and you've decided to upload on a weekly basis, you have to make sure that you can produce that amount of content and keep uploading it on a weekly basis. And in order to do that, you have to know how much time you're going to put into the content that you have to upload. So this is very important. First step is finding out how much time do you have to actually make this comic. How many hours a week can you dedicate to this? Once you know this, then you can start looking at, okay, let's say I've got 20 hours a week because I've got a day job or whatever it might be. For 20 hours, how long does it take me to create a single page or 2 pages or a single strip, and how much time basically do I need to get the work done? If you upload say a page a week or a page spread a week, you really need to know what you're going to invest into this. Now there are many different ways of doing it. There's many different art styles. So for this next part, it's best that I just show you on the screen while you have a voiceover of me. So let's dive right into that. All right, so here I'm going to try to explain about finding that visual art style and why it is so unbelievably important. So I have the screen split pretty much in two. One is focused on immersion and the other one on reset access denied. So these are the two webcomics that I have experience in and I've been working on. So that's what I can show from my point of view. So I'm going to start with immersion, as this is the very first one that I tackled. So the way I did immersion was to start with test panels. All right, so the test panels are these ones that you can see here in the top. That's one of them. If I go to, for example, archives, you'll see the next one, and then this one was the third test panel that I did, and at the about you have the fourth one. Okay, so all of these took different amounts of time to get done, and once they got finished, I moved on to doing the test pages, which you can see here at the bottom. Now I'll make them bigger in a second, and then you can see what I mean. So maybe it's best that I just show you the images from Immersion, the webcomic. So I'll quickly take you there now. It's in preview right here. Right, so here you can actually see the timekeeping on each page that I did for Immersion, each test page, and also each panel. So this was the very first test panel I did, and took me 8 hours and 24 minutes to do. I've got this on Procreate, and all of this work, or at least all the test panels for sure, you can already see how they were made on my YouTube channel. You'll find them in somewhere uploaded in 2016. And the second one took 6 hours and 20 minutes. Then the third one went super fast. Obviously, you can definitely see that there is a change in art style. Okay, so for example, the second one has much more ink details. The first one is looks a little bit more like an animation, like a high-end animation that you would have, whereas the third one looks more like your usual weekly animations where there's not too much detail, so it's quite basic, hence why it only took 2 hours and 43 minutes. And the fourth one was a bit like with a bit of a painterly style approach. So they're very different, and based on this, when you look at it, you're like, okay, if one single strip would take me that amount of time, how much would it take me to do an entire page? And that's where you'll go into the test pages, right? So the first test page right here that you can see here took me 16 hours and 34 minutes to complete. The second one, which is this one right here, took me 28 hours and 38 minutes. Now that's because I was playing around with many different settings. So the version you see here is not the painted version. I have the painted version on the website, which I will show you in a second. But yeah, it took quite a while to get this right. Now, again, speed is not necessarily super important during your development phase. Okay, you are still trying to basically develop your art style. This can just, this will take longer than while you're in production. Once you enter production phase, you should normally have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. But this is just to give you an idea of, okay, like how long it potentially could take. The third page was 16 hours and 44 minutes, and the last one, which was done in Clip Studio Paint, 18 hours and 12 minutes. So it all depends. I mean, then when you go for something as simple as what you're seeing here, a completely different art style, it goes much faster. It took me just about an hour to get this strip done, and this one took me also just about an hour, a little bit more, maybe an hour and 15 minutes or so. But it goes super fast. So these ones are the type that you would, for example, upload for webtoons, for example, and you would upload them maybe, more frequently than something that's more complicated to do. So as you can see, if I go to the actual pages itself, it's very different in style, obviously. I mean, you cannot really compare. Yeah. I mean, here's the painterly look that I was discussing. So this one took much longer to create, and yeah, that's just the way it is. Sometimes you just take a lot of time on these things. Here's the other one, and they're very different in art style. And obviously, because while I was making these, it was all about just finding the right fit for the comic. It's just the way that these things go. For Reset Access Denied, which I can show you, art of David Arroyo, let's do that. And if I go here to Reset Access Denied, you'll see it right here. So you've got there we go. This one is that, and that one represents this strip. This one represents that one, and so forth, and it goes down. Here again, They took different times. The times was, for the first one, it was 5 hours and 22 minutes. The second strip took me 4 hours and 25 minutes. The third, 4 hours and 49. Basically, I've got it all summed up here again as a total time, plus 3 strips make up 1 page. So on average, I make these pages for always below 15 hours. I don't know about the last one yet, so this is only the first strip of the 3rd page, which is very detailed, hence why it took me 6 hours and 47 minutes to do. But yeah, it's normal. It's normal when you're. It's a different scene. There's it's an establishing shot, so there's quite a lot that comes into play. And so yeah, there you go. That basically concludes the part on finding an art style. As you've seen, it just really depends what you're going for. Detailed comics have a lot of detail in them and they take a long time to make. So you have to think about how you're going to distribute that and how fast you can chunk them out. So if it's a page at 15 hours a week, then you could safely say that you could do 1 page per week. So there you go. That's basically my thoughts on finding an art style. Right, so there you have it. That concludes the development phase onto making comics. As I've said before, making comics takes quite some time. There's really a lot that comes to play. There's a lot of stuff that you need to do before you can actually get the work done. Sometimes it takes weeks, months. It depends on your project. But the development phase is all about getting your story right, getting that visual art style right, and preparing yourself for the next phase, which is the pre-production phase. And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at in the next episode. So if you like this type of content, feel free to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and by all means, I always like to hear from my followers, from my subscribers. What are you guys doing? What is your way of working during the development phase? How do you make comics? Do you have a completely different way of making comics? Please leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. All right, thank you very much for stopping by, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.